The bride who carried only one promise. The stagecoach arrived in Dust Creek, Montana Territory, just after sunrise on a cold September morning. The wheels groaned as they rolled to a stop outside the small depot, sending clouds of dust drifting across the empty street. Storekeepers were still unlocking their doors, and ranch hands paused their work long enough to watch the passengers climb down. Nathan Hale stood beside his wagon, turning his hat nervously in his hands. At 35, Nathan had spent nearly his entire life on the same cattle ranch his father had built from open prairie. He knew every creek, every cottonwood tree, and every fence post for 20 miles in any direction. But despite all those years, there was one thing he had never learned to live with. Silence. His parents were gone. His younger brother had left for California years before. The evenings were the hardest. After long days riding the range, he returned to a house where only the ticking clock answered him. That loneliness had finally persuaded him to write to a mail-order marriage agency in St. Louis. He hadn't asked for beauty. He hadn't asked for wealth. His letter contained only one request. Please send me a woman who believes that kindness is worth more than comfort. 3 months later, the agency replied. Her name was Rose Bennett. She was 28 years old, originally from Ohio, recently employed as a seamstress, and willing to begin a new life in the Montana Territory. Her letters were thoughtful, honest, and surprisingly direct. She admitted she had never ridden a horse. She admitted she knew almost nothing about ranching. But she promised she wasn't afraid of hard work. That was enough for Nathan. The coach door opened. A young woman stepped onto the wooden platform carrying a single leather suitcase. She wore a simple blue traveling dress beneath a brown coat that had clearly seen many miles. Her chestnut hair was pinned neatly beneath a modest bonnet. I was beginning to worry Montana had forgotten about me. We're not fast, Nathan replied. But we usually remember. For the first time since leaving Ohio, Rose laughed. The sound surprised even her. Their wedding took place 2 days later inside the small white church overlooking Dust Creek. The preacher, the sheriff, and the general store owner served as witnesses. There were no flowers. No family members. No grand celebration. Only 2 strangers making a promise neither fully understood. As they stepped outside, the autumn wind swept across the valley. Nathan looked at his new wife. I don't expect this to feel natural right away. Rose nodded. I don't either. But we'll give it an honest chance. She extended her hand. That sounds like a good beginning. Instead of shaking it, Nathan gently held it while helping her into the wagon. Neither mentioned the moment again. The ranch sat 5 miles outside town. It wasn't large by Montana standards, but it was well cared for. A weathered farmhouse overlooked rolling grasslands where cattle grazed beneath endless blue skies. Rose stood quietly on the porch. It's beautiful. Nathan looked across the fields. I've lived here so long I stopped noticing. Then I'll remind you. Life settled into a steady rhythm. Rose learned quickly. Within a week she could bake bread in the old cast-iron oven without burning it. Within 2 weeks she was collecting eggs, feeding chickens, and helping repair broken fencing. By the end of the month she could saddle a horse with only a little assistance. Nathan admired something else. She never complained. Not about the cold mornings. Not about hauling water. Not about the endless work. Whenever something needed doing, she simply rolled up her sleeves and began. One evening Nathan found her sewing patches onto his oldest work shirt. You didn't have to fix that. She smiled without looking up. I know. Then why? Because tomorrow you'll need it. Winter arrived earlier than expected. Heavy snow buried the trails, and fierce winds howled across the open plains. One storm lasted nearly 3 days. Travel became impossible. The ranch disappeared beneath drifting snow. Inside, they passed the long evenings beside the fireplace. Nathan carved wooden toys. Rose mended blankets while reading aloud from an old Bible she had carried since childhood. Little by little, conversations grew easier. She spoke about growing up beside the Ohio River. He shared stories of learning to rope cattle with his father. One snowy evening, Rose asked quietly, "Were you ever in love before writing to the agency?" Nathan stared into the fire. "I thought I might be once." "What happened?" "She married someone who wanted city life." Rose waited. "Did it hurt?" "For a while." She nodded gently. "I understand." Nathan looked at her. "You do?" She smiled sadly. "I wasn't the first choice either." Neither spoke again for several minutes. They didn't need to. Spring finally returned. Grass covered the hills once more, and calves began filling the pastures. Everything seemed brighter. Until one afternoon. Nathan returned from repairing fences to find an elegant carriage parked outside the farmhouse. A sharply dressed man stood on the porch speaking with Rose. She looked uncomfortable. The moment she noticed Nathan, relief crossed her face. The stranger removed his hat. "My name is Charles Whitmore." Nathan climbed down slowly. "What brings you here?" "I've come on behalf of Rose's late uncle." Rose lowered her eyes. Nathan noticed her hands trembling. Whitmore continued. "Your wife recently inherited property in Ohio." Nathan looked at Rose. "You never mentioned family." "I didn't know there was any left." Whitmore opened a leather case. "The inheritance includes a successful textile mill and a considerable fortune." Silence settled over the porch. Finally Nathan asked, "What happens now?" Rose looked from the lawyer, to the ranch, to the wide Montana sky stretching beyond the fields. Then she answered, "I choose my family." Whitmore blinked. "The estate is worth more than most ranches in this territory." Rose smiled softly. "I didn't travel 2,000 miles to find money." She reached for Nathan's hand. "I came looking for home." The lawyer quietly closed his case. "I believe I have my answer." As the carriage disappeared down the dusty road, Nathan looked toward his wife. "You just walked away from a fortune." Rose laughed. "No." She squeezed his hand. "I walked toward one." Years later, whenever travelers asked how the quiet rancher and his mail-order bride had found such lasting happiness, the neighbors always gave the same answer. It wasn't love at first sight. It was something stronger. They chose each other every single day. If you enjoyed this original Old West story, please like, share, and subscribe for more heartwarming frontier tales filled with courage, hope, and unforgettable characters.